So now we're starting. Hello to everybody. My name is Mikołaj Sekutovic. I'm the curator, CEO of Therme Art and VP for Strategic Development and Culture at the Therme Group. I'm delighted that you all could join us here today to discuss the idea of the human city. The human city is the topic of the green paper that we have just published as Therme Group. And this is a paper that is just the start of our thinking. So it's not a paper that is basically closing the discussion, but for us personally, it's a first step summarizing what we have learned in the past years, but especially in the past months, since the pandemic started and affected all our lives everywhere in the world. Hans Ulrich, in one of our previous Wellbeing Culture Forum sessions, said that now it's a renegotiation of how we are going to live together, not only, of course, with social distancing that we need for architecture, for the design of future cities, but how we are going to live together in terms of actually addressing the extinction crisis. And that leads me to a topic that I think we all now experienced, that while we are socially distanced, we learn how interconnected we are, more interconnected than ever. A virus that is actually a part of our biology was able to completely change our habits, our everyday lives, affecting all our families and all our societies. So in the micro and in the macrocosmos. And we learned that our design is not really prepared to answer these questions yet. Yeah, so we did incredible progress in the past 30 years in the virtual world. But if we look at our real world, this progress is probably going simply in the wrong direction. We learned, and this is why we also started the Wellbeing Culture Forum, that the topics well-being and culture don't receive the right attention through our societies. We also learned that if we are not well, we are probably already sick. And when we are sick, we are probably already moving towards extinction. Yeah. We also learned, this is a very personal thing, that we are interconnected inside and outside. Yeah, so when we are creating a design that is basically not able to sustain a healthy population with a high immunological resistance, that's one big problem. But on the other hand, this design, when it's consuming our planet, it's another big problem. So we have created, the form of organization of humans. This is also one of the main fundaments of the green paper, is that the city is the main organization, and it will be even stronger in the years to come. And this form of organization must be sustainable for us as a population, and it must be also sustainable for the planet that is hosting the cities. Yeah, so we have to get back into a balance that we have unfortunately completely lost. Yeah. So this Wellbeing Culture Forum had already 4 iterations. This is now the 5th discussions. We started with the social culture of cities as a very important topic. Then in partnership with the Serpentine Gallery, we did the topic about art and architecture. Then with Art Basel, Marc Spiegler, and with the Manchester International Festival, the culture of life events, what is another big topic, obviously, for us. And then with the British Council, this is also a long-term partner now, as we're supporting their presentation at the Architectural Biennale and also the Biennale di Arte. We did the session on the 29th of July about architecture of health and happiness. We thank our partners very much for their continuous support, because today it's all about our thoughts and our ideas and how they help us to recreate our very own product that I will introduce in a second, but also how they help us to spread idea that is about not anymore only our product, but it's also about the cities itself. Speaking about spreading the idea, the Design platform is our media partner here that is live streaming this talk and the other talks, and we're extremely thankful also to Design for this opportunity. Introducing the green paper that we have published that you can see on our website, I want to highlight the United Nations report that you all know, that 65 million people a year, 65 million people, this is, you know, this is almost the population of Germany, are joining the community of cities, are organizing themselves in cities. So up to 2050, we will have 2.5 billion more people expected to move into the urban environment, and this all leads us to so we can already predict that if we scale what we have created until now into the future, we as species, we don't have to discuss probably climate change, because we will already extinct ourselves before, because our populations will be weak and they will consume basically all the natural resources. Our CEO and my very good friend and partner, Robert Hanea, he put it, one of his, one quote that I want to, it's from one of the other Wellbeing Culture Forums, where he said, "We are a product of a connected nature. We are not standing next to nature. We are nature. We are in every way a product of it." And I believe that we disconnected ourselves from this universal truth. It's very interesting when you look into the cities. What Robert Hanea is saying here is that when we look into the cities, we are basically, we created an environment where the only natural part remains us as biological forms of life, and everything else is basically only decoration. But our bodies were created in 200,000 years of evolution in a constant interaction with a natural environment. This kind of design approach to have this under consideration is probably one of the biggest challenges for the design of future cities. So everybody of you here, and we are extremely thankful for you to be here. I said this already in my preparation talk, that for us, this is the collection of ideas, and collection of people that have a similar motivation and that are working in a similar direction. So it doesn't have to be controversial discussions, although they can be, absolutely. But for us, it's extremely important to learn from all of you and also to share our knowledge with you. And I want to introduce now the panelists that I'm extremely thankful to participate in this talk. So I want to start with you, Stefano Boeri. We were introduced by the great Hans-Ulrich Obrist. You were already participating in one of our talks, and we wanted to have you here in this conversation, also as one of the first to review our green paper, The Human City. You yourself, I don't have to introduce you too much because everybody knows you as the president of the Triennale in Milano, and also as the creator of the vertical forest building in Milano, and one of the maybe strongest motors of an urbanization based on the reconnection to plant life. Yeah, we have our common friend that is also in our advisory board, Stefano Mancuso from Italy. I'm very happy that that you are here and that you are participating in our conversation. Then I would like to introduce Annie Hood, the co-founder and chief executive of Well Intelligence. You are working in the well-being sector as one of the maybe most innovative protagonists, and I'm very much looking forward to learn from you. What is your take on the integration of well-being in the human cities? Thank you, very nice to have you. So Hai Kan, that works for many years with Google. We met, I think the first time, I don't know if you remember, but through the project that you have supported with the Serpentine Gallery, this amazing project, the Deep Listener from Jakob Krupp-Stensen, that is participating in our next Wellbeing Culture Forum, where the experiment of connecting the augmented reality with the park in the Kensington Gardens is something that really blew my mind and showed me how powerful it is, this technology that just started basically to exist, to implement and to use also as a part of our reconnection to nature, actually. So how technology can bring us back to nature. And I think I'm extremely happy to learn more from you about this project. Then Ben Rogers. Ben Rogers is, I can almost say a partner of our group. Our presence that is extremely strong in UK, I think wouldn't be possible and thinkable without you and without your activity. Ben Rogers is the director of the Center of London, urbanist, researcher, writer, speaker. And I'm very happy that you join us and that we will discuss this common topic. And I'm also very happy that you introduced us to Denny Srikandaraja. I hope I say your name right. Srikandaraja, the chef executive of Oxfam in Great Britain. This is an organization that is actually, in my opinion, basically every organization should be a little bit Oxfam. Every even for-profit organization should be a little bit like Oxfam. I think the reconnection between non-profit and profit, so to use the best of both worlds, this is exactly what Oxfam is doing, able to motivate corporates on an international level, but also humans on a broad level to participate in this endeavor, and also to do lobby for the people that are disconnected, forgotten, and this is maybe something that we all have to understand, that through COVID-19, basically learning through the virus. This was for me in the last 3 months really a big topic, learning through the virus, that it doesn't matter if you are rich and healthy, if your neighbor is poor and unhealthy, you will die. Yeah, because your neighbor is a part of you, it's a part of basically your body. So I think we have to learn from organizations like you and from your work. And I'm also very much looking forward, and I'm very thankful that you're participating in this talk. Then the very well-known leading creator, design consultant, writer, Jane Witters, that is also working already with us, and we are extremely happy about this, to the topic of water. Jane is also working in between the different sectors of private and public institutions as brand consultant, but also curating programs and acclaimed exhibitions at the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Royal Academy of Arts. The curatorial take on the world, actually, it's a very new perspective, recently developed in the last 20 years, but we learned that the curatorial perspective is a very strong perspective because it keeps the mind extremely open, and working together with artists keeps us not forgetting, not specializing too much, and keeps a very broad perspective. And this broad perspective is something that we forget sometimes specializing, like this is probably the story of the next speaker, Professor Dr. Jörg Spitz, that worked over 25 years as the head of the Department of the Nuclear Medicine in Wiesbaden, and then after his retirement discovered the holistic approach of medicine, and then started first to graduate in preventive medicine and nutrition, and since then authored several books, has 100,000 of followers on YouTube, and is basically preaching the common sense of prevention. And I'm very happy that we have you here also, Professor Jörg Spitz, to open the discussion in the direction of health and medicine, and how a healthy city can help us to sustain. Thank you very much for being there. So the first question is to you, Stefano, if you could maybe give us a short introduction into how you are connected to the topic of well-being and how your practice, your work is helping to realize what we try to propose with our green paper on the one hand, and where you see the biggest obstacles in your work and in bringing it really to life.
Thank you so much, Nikolai. So I try to share the screen just to do my best if it's possible. I don't know if you see. Do you see?
Yes.
The list of. So basically, I'd love to start with some very, very, let's say, simple slide. That's more or less is the urban Pangaea. So it's a distribution of cities in the planet, megalopolis, metropolis, big, middle-sized, small cities. But if we could imagine that we could concentrate all what is city in one unique part of the planet, probably we will not cover more than 3% of the surface of the emerging lands. It's true, absolutely true, that let's say the flows of images, the networks, that this 3% is capable to create all over the world, this kind of technosphere, it's tremendously bigger than the 3%. But what makes this 3%, let's say, so even from our point of view, is that this 3% is capable to develop and to create some, let's say, big, tremendous trouble for the living species of the planet. So we know well, for instance, that this 3% is consuming the 70% of the resources of the planet, but basically what is more important, it is producing the 75% of the CO2 emissions which are present in the atmosphere. On the other side, if we consider the presence of the forest and the trees and the woodlands, they will not cover more than the 30%. But this 30% is, let's say, so crucial for the life of the living species of the planet. It's implemented biodiversity, it's, let's say, absorbing the 30% of that CO2 that the cities are producing. And we know well that this proportion, the relation between the extension of the urban surfaces and their responsibility in creating, let's say, the causes of climate change or global warming, at the same time can be compensated by the diffusion of woodland and forest. But we know well that cities that probably are the cause of climate change, and from another point of view, they are the first victim of climate change, because just think to the flooding process that are, let's say, threatening a lot of coastal metropolitan environments. So we have to do our best to make a city capable to tackle climate change, transforming the role from cause to victim to, let's say, protagonist of a big campaign to climate change. And from that point of view, I think that what we can do in terms of redefining a relation with other living species and imagine investing in green, it's very important. So we know what's happening, and we know well that there are quite a complicated eclectic literature on the relations in our and other species, but basically what is clear is what we were saying, that the extension of this 3% of the nature has changed a lot the relation with the other living species. The process of deforestation were so, let's say, all of what's happened, and also in terms of creating process of spillover that are beginning of the diffusion of the contagion, and that is something that we know quite well. So I believe that from our point of view, we had to, as you were saying, and right to quote Stefano Mancuso and Emanuele Coccia, we have to redefine our role in the planet. Probably we have to also develop a new kind of anthropocentrism and trying to make the fragility that this pandemic left us as a heritage in a capacity to, let's say, try to put our field in the eyes of the other living species to really change our perspective on the urban life. But from another point of view, we have to invest on trees, on environment. Trees are extremely important. Trees are, let's say, reducing the effects of global warming. They absorb CO2 and transform CO2 in oxygen. So the more we are able to multiply the number of trees in our environment, the more we can really make trees capable to fight the enemy in its own field. Trees are absorbing the dust, the mercurial dust of urban pollution. And that has become so important in the last month because we now know that the pollution, air pollution, it's one of the causes of the intensity of the diffusion of the virus in some part of the planet, in the most polluted cities. So that's another advantage and contribution that trees can do, but trees are also implementing the biodiversity. They are reducing the effect of the city, so reducing the effect of the island that many cities have, and cities are also more in general able to improve the quality of our lives. So basically, I think what we could do, what we should do, and what in more minimal things I try to do is to imagine how we can change our idea of architecture and green. So we have worked a lot with the idea to create green buildings where it's not simply to introduce green as an ornamental or decorative presence in our architecture, but what we try to do is much more, let's say, radicals. The idea is to really imagine then we can put together architecture and live in nature. So the forest, the vertical forest that we are developing in different parts of the world has this character. We create like a unique multiple organism where green plants, trees, birds, and humans are cohabiting. And that's, I think it could become the starting point of a new perspective on architecture. This is what you've done in Milano and what is a reference to what we are trying to do in many other parts of Europe or the world. So it's, as you can see, this is a real presence of nature. It's not simply a decoration or for it to design. But at the same time, I think this is something we have to do at a different scale. And trying also to see how trees, plants, environment can contribute to the quality of life of cities that should become more and more close to the idea of an archipelago of self-sufficient boroughs, self-sufficient villages, where everybody could reach facilities what he needs in not more than 20 minutes, and where the green environment will become the protagonist of the future of our life. That's, for example, the project we are developing in Mexico, and this is a kind of new forest city where more than 7 million of trees and plants, and every building, every space has a presence of trees everywhere, has a basic contribution to what we do. So I believe that this is simply one part of the future. The other is that it is true, we have to imagine how trees move toward cities. We have also to imagine how humans move toward forest. That's the project we're developing in Italy, the idea to a big part. I think that the key word is connectivity. We have to connect the natural part, we have to connect the forest and use cities not as obstacles, but as nodes of this possible connection. You know well what's happening in Africa with this green wall that from Nigeria to Senegal has for thousands of miles connected and created a barrier to the extension of Sahara there into the south. So I think that model is something that to reproduce in different parts of the world, and that is something that, for instance, we are developing in Italy. From that point of view, this is simply one last image, is something that we are doing in Geneva. We have been asked to imagine the future of Geneva, to imagine an extension of metropolitan environment. And what we have done is to create a constellation of small villages that put Geneva in a context of a larger environment. And at the center of this new idea of a metropolitan environment, we have a mountain, we have animals, we have the real life. So I believe this is simply one of the ways we have to, let's say, we can try to change the relation between cities and forest. Thank you so much, Nikolai.
Stefano, thank you so much. This is really extremely impressive and leads me immediately to our next panelist, Soher. What we have seen here from Stefano, it's reconnection. You know that the word religion comes from the Latin word religare. Religare, what means reconnection to God in the sense of religion. What Stefano showed us is the reconnection to nature. Maybe somebody from my team could change the view of the screen back to our normal view. That is not shared screen. So perfect. We saw in the past 30 years, basically, before the internet, obviously, there was already an extreme development in computer technology that led to the internet that then since 96 completely boosted, our world and our economy. And also what Hans Ulrich is always referring to as production of reality. Production of reality now is possible because of computerization and because of interconnection. There's like a network where we are able to communicate and create virtual rooms. We can, meanwhile, enter these rooms, even live in these rooms, meet in these rooms. So we invested an incredible amount of resources, money, but maybe even more intellectual resources into creating a digital mirror, basically, of our world. Now, this technology probably, and this is what I found so impressive with the deep listener work from Jakob Kurt-Stenson, is possibly this technology can reconnect us now to nature, can lead us back into nature. And we believe that culture is the necessary bridge to it, because culture was, since we started actually to build, to create, it was always a tendency against nature. It was always to exclude nature, to keep nature outside because nature was threatening. Now we created a world where we are maybe one of the strongest forces of nature with our culture. And now is the big question to you, how your practice personally is trying to reconnect, working for Google, working in other projects, trying to reconnect these realms, the realm of the Garden Eden with the realm of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an amazing set of panelists and really interesting presentation. So I would say, yes, so I've worked on Google Arts and Culture for many years. I work for Google, I work in technology, but one thing to just keep in mind is that the numbers that you mentioned at the very beginning, the scope of people living in cities, the scope of people who are internally displaced within countries and moving to cities, and now this unknown of what happens after COVID, how many millions or billions of people are forced to leave cities, I think goes beyond what can be solved or addressed with things like technology in this moment. I think what's been incredible about this pandemic, as you said, is that on the one hand, we're completely disconnected, but on the other hand, we've had technology to connect. This doesn't take away from the fact that we've all had very different experiences of the exact same moment in time. We are very much experiencing nature, the world, technology on our own terms. Let's not forget that everybody has a very different level of connectivity. I'm in Pakistan right now. Both Karachi and Bombay have just been completely flooded. Internet is out, electricity is out, and suddenly you're actually physically alone. And one of the reasons, obviously, has been, it is said, is climate change. As these rains are worse than ever, these floods are worse than ever. Having said that, my work has been very much at, the nexus of the most sophisticated, I think, is how can you bring technology to art, to culture, to open up new worlds. So Google Arts and Culture is an online platform where we digitize the collections of museums. We bring online the stories of curators and artists, and to create more access to culture from, I think, over now 80 countries around the world. We work with 2,000 cultural institutions to showcase their collections. And we also work directly with artists, like we did with Jakob, to help to bring technology to their practice. So on the one hand, we have this amazing opportunity, especially during this time of lockdown and beyond, to open up doors, to create new stories and new avenues. And Jakob's work was very much focused on climate change and this idea of nature. We actually worked with him to create an augmented reality experience for the first ever virtual pavilion for the Serpentine last summer. So you had the physical pavilion, and then we created with him this augmented reality world where you stepped back into Hyde Park outside of the Serpentine. And this was all him, his idea. It was an application process. We had hundreds of applications, and our judging panel, of course, included Hans Ulrich Obrist, it included Amit Sood from Google Arts and Culture, David Ajay, Virgil Abloh. So sort of this incredible group of people who said, the augmented reality pavilion that we choose is one which engages with nature and the park. And Jakob was looking to create a world where you take your phone, you project an image or a set of images from your phone onto the ground, and you're suddenly surrounded by the natural environment of Hyde Park, the things we don't see. So the animals, there's a list of species of wildlife, the plants, the flora, the fauna. And suddenly we're confronted with, we're not just walking through a park in a really big city, we're looking at the tiny things that we don't notice, the things that we should be appreciating and preserving and conserving. And I do think, to your point, it is, most of us are living in cities, more and more people are going to live in cities. How can we start to come back to nature? Of course, it is good for our mental health, for our well-being, but equally, it's important for all of us to know what's there and what we're losing. So this particular project, you could go to the Serpentine, download this app on your phone and project into the world, this beautiful, magical space. There was stereoscopic sound, so you could hear sounds around you. You had to go to a particular point in the park for an image or a vision to manifest, and then that would be your experience. It was also very, very immersive, beautiful, moving, and then you put your phone away, and that's that. Obviously now we can still go to the park, but we can't, in fact, the Serpentine is just open, so you can go inside and it's a very different experience. But I think to come back to your earlier point of, we are at the end of the day animals, we are of nature, we have completely disconnected from that. Maybe technology, for those of us who are privileged to be able to have these experiences, can open up a little bit of the doors that remind us, and equally for young people, for students, for those who feel lonely, displaced, disconnected, it's one more way of coming into that world.
Yeah, totally. So I was quite fascinated at the opening of this show from Jakob. I was going with the phone because you have to look in the phone and then you see the augmented reality. And then suddenly I saw this amazing, first I heard actually the sound of parrots, and then I saw these parrots through the phone, and I thought like, this is incredible how realistic they are. And then I discovered this were actually realistic parrots in the Kensington Gardens. That there's this place with the tree where since, like 20 years, Ben, maybe you can say something about the parrots in the Kensington Gardens. You know about them, right? You are aware of the parrots because you're on mute now.
I know a bit about them, but it's not something I'm an expert in. But
so I can maybe as you're the CEO, the director, the chairman of Centre of London. So I discovered the parrots through this application, but they were not part of the augmentation; they were part of the reality. And there is a place in the Kensington Gardens where you have this 100, 200 parrots. They came with the with the ships by incident, and then they started to live probably also because of global warming, they were able to survive. And now there's a lot of people coming every day to feed these parrots, and you can see the interactions between humans and animals. This is what Stefano said. This is also something that is part of Jakob Kurt-Stenson's work, because he's introducing completely new organisms in this augmented reality. But there are also the old organisms in the real reality, Ben, and this is something that I think we have to bring back into the cities, as Stefano is preaching almost, I have to say.
I agree with that, but I think the green infrastructure is really, really important, but so is the social or the human infrastructure. So the connections between us and nature are absolutely sort of vital, and increasingly we can see how you can do that in cities and make it meaningful. But no less important are the sort of social spaces and the sort of social institutions, from the streets to the parks to the libraries, which I think people appreciate more and more, actually. And I think it's interesting to make a distinction between urbanization and urbanism, because urbanization is something which is ongoing and went on through much of the 20th century, and were sort of deep economic drivers of that. But urbanism is a sort of movement which is about humanizing cities, and in the way, some ways that's a sort of more recent thing, because actually lots of the urbanization in the 20th century in particular were just really, really poor. I mean, it was that's still ongoing to some extent, but it was car dominated. It was about zoning. It was often quite anti-urban, actually, in its values. I mean, it was it saw cities often as sort of dirty and unattractive places, and it imagined towers in parks and all of that. And I think really since Jane Jacobs and the 1960s and 70s, we've seen this movement of urbanism and a growth of this, people who identify, like me, or identify themselves as urbanists. And we celebrate the city as something which is efficient, which is sustainable, which is a source of innovation and creativity and culture, which is cosmopolitan in its values. And we haven't won the day at all, but we've become a sort of more powerful force. And there are people like me who sort of think about these things and work on these things for a living. But I think also, amongst the general population, city dwellers, particularly in the West, you're seeing a sort of reevaluation of the city. People, wanting more shared space. It's fascinating to watch the Greens, win city after city in the recent French elections. What mayors across Europe and indeed the States are doing to sort of contain and expel the car from city centres. This new focus on parks and livable streets and play streets, and natural spaces and natural infrastructure and social infrastructure, developing hand in hand.
What's your... Yes, sorry.
No. I just wondered if I could add something, because it's in sort of polarity to what Suhair is saying, but I think extremely relevant. And it's about nature and technology. And just in the last couple of weeks, I did a nature pilgrimage, and we were out of the city, but this sort of thing could be done equally as well in a city. So a group of us went to a part of the country, and it was to do with immersion in nature and what it means to calibrate with nature's frequency, with a 432 frequency, what it does to our body field. And it was really quite remarkable. And part of that process was dumping our devices. So before the pilgrimage, our body fields were measured, and I'd love to hear from the professor or anyone else, frankly. Our body fields were measured, and they were all about 1.5 meters. But when we held our phone, 0. It completely dispels our body field. And after 24 hours of barefoot in camp, barefoot hiking, and sleeping overnight in the woods, which may sound extreme, but it was remarkable in its simplicity, actually, in how it just completely changed how we all felt in such a short space of time. And after our hike in the morning, we remeasured the body fields, and they'd grown to something like 7 meters. And that, you know, the leader was, you know, it was very predictable for him, of course, he's done it so many times. But he was someone who'd led in the Sinai Desert and led various royalty, global leaders and so on, just about how important our body field is and how precious, and how recalibrating with nature brings that back to us so quickly and so easily. So I'm sorry to, you know, sort of bring that polarity in, Suhair, but it's true too. You know, that immersion in nature is so valuable to all of us for so many different reasons.
Definitely. In fact, I mean, I would say this about a museum. Like, if you can go, you know, there's no way you can say that anything should replace being physically in a place. And at the end of the day, we all know that being on your phone too much is not good for you. We're all exhausted by these conversations online. So 1,000%.
Well, I should add to that you know, that you know, my own belief is that the future of well-being will be simultaneously led by technology, nature, but defined by humanity. There's no way forward without technology, but I think nature is right up there in, you know, in pole position.
Professor Spitz, you were called out by Annie Hood to give the medical perspective on it, and I, you know, we've had all these talks together, and I think that's basically a very interesting perspective, going from a very rational school medical perspective that you went through. Maybe you can give a short take on that, and then developing with this knowledge into the holistic medicine approach.
But still staying with both legs in the scientific world. There is no esoteric things, but it's scientific. So may I have the slides, please, which I prepared? And I give you just some glimpses from different aspects, which are all important. And the first thing I would like to mention is the problem, the actual pandemic, is the media. And the huge problem with the media, because the media do no longer serve us, but they use us, they misuse us. And you can see it also with the pandemic. Maybe we have a chance to get my slides.
The slides, please, the slides. Yeah, it looks like.
So if you look to the media, there is, for half a year now, there is only one topic. It's Corona. Corona. There are global deaths from Johns Hopkins University, almost 1 million. Exactly, it's impressive. But if you continue to the next slide, and we have a look at the statistics and official data. Next slide, please.
Yes, looks like good.
Okay, this is our problem. It's not the viruses. It's obesity as a part of non-communicable diseases. This is a drawing I'm using now for 10 years or more. You see on the right side, that's the input, the lean people, the output on the left side, and in between, that's the put. That's a German word for chicken. So the people go to the fast food bin, and what happens? They get fat. They do not go there to become fat, but it happens they get fat. Why? Because we and the humanity changed their food environment. We have a toxic food environment, and the result is non-communicable diseases. Let's have a look at the figures of the non-communicable diseases. Next slide, please. This is very, okay, should not be here, but what we see today from the cities is a desert of stone, glass, and steel. And it is good to have some living trees, and a lot of living trees there. But another aspect is we have to change our building material. It has also become natural. 30% of the CO2 exposure comes from building material. If we switch to a natural material, and that is wood, if you would have a large part of constructions in the cities from the wood, we would live again in wood. And who has ever been sleeping in a wooden cabin, who knows that it's almost as good as being outside in the trees. So we go ahead with that. Yeah, World Health Organization published in 2018 that non-communicable diseases is 70% of all death in the world. If you look at Germany or maybe France or Japan, it's 90%. That means 90% of the population is dying from non-communicable diseases, not from viruses, but from diseases which come by our wrong lifestyle. We go ahead. So here you see corona death this year, 800,000. If we look last year, there were by infection influenza, 500,000, but look at tuberculosis, 1.5 million deaths. Did you hear anything about tuberculosis in the media? Nothing. That is double the amount of death every year, but tuberculosis is not interesting. And still more, the next one on the right side is actually non-communicable disease. Yeah? It's heart disease. 80 million people die from heart disease. Compare it to 1 million with COVID-19. But you see nothing from that in the media. Cancer, 9 million. Lung disease, 4 million. And even diabetes kills 1.6 million. Then it's double the amount of the COVID-19 deaths. But the media only push COVID-19, coronavirus. So people get completely wrong informed. They get brainwashed, they get wrong informed. They do not learn what is essential for them, but they learn something else. Can we go ahead? So that's a human lifestyle, which is the problem. And I'm going to show why this is this. And the cost is 1 billion alone in Germany, and not per year, but per day. In Germany, we pay 1 billion euro every day for the sick people, not for health. It's only for the sick people. Next, please. So last century, an American biologist has said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And this was, for me, actually a very important idea. And we developed it and say today, nothing in healthcare makes sense except in the light of evolution and environment. And that's our topic today, the extreme topic for our health and the environment in the light of evolution. We go ahead. I have had this picture for many years now, and it shows our evolution. And if you look at the left side, you have on the top, you have the sun, which we lost almost completely. There is almost no sun in the cities. And below that, you have some small viruses, some small bacteria. They were the first living creatures on this world. And please do not believe that they vanished. They are still here. They are dominating our planet, and all the other creatures which came had to live with them together. And also the human body is not able to live on its own. He is living together with 1 or 2.5 kilograms of these bugs and bacteria. So we are unable to live without them. We live in a symbiosis, and it's a stupid idea to declare a war to the bacteria and viruses. We have to find a measure to live with them. And nature did it. We got an immune system. And this immune system was tuned and is today perfect to handle the symbiosis with the viruses, but only if the immune system and our body gets the necessary resources. If the resources are not there, it does not work. Please go ahead. The problem comes now when the humans were able to develop tools and to start to change the world. So it was agriculture which was the first step for civilization. And we have to say that's the dark side of the anthropocene. We are so proud that we have now put our stamp on the earth, but it's a dark side, and this is all our problem with the diseases. But let's go back to the evolution side. If we look to the next slide, what we see there, before agriculture started, there was something else. I do not know whether you ever saw that. And there's another picture below that. And if you make it bigger in the next picture, what do we see? We see the culture of arts. 20,000, 30,000 years ago, that was done of the left side, this flute. It has been done all out of a bone of a bird. And most of you know this drawings in the French caves. That means 20,000 years before agriculture started, we had the culture of arts. And the question is, what happened to this culture? What happened to the human species that they switched from the culture of art to the culture of agriculture? Completely different. And we lost this very important development of evolution. We lost it by concentrating on agriculture and civilization. Please go ahead. The reason why the environment is so important is that we learned some 20 years ago that our genes are actually the blueprint of us. In the genes, all the knowledge of the evolution is written together, but the genes are unable to give this information to the cell. The cell has to read this information, and it does it by epigenetics. That are tools to be able for the cell to read the genes. And the curious thing is that these tools come as a part from inside, but go back, please. Many of them come from outside. You see cigarette smoke, you see the financial stress, you see the microbiome, you see social interaction. All these influences in our environment have an influence on the epigenetics. That means how the cells are able to control their genes. And on top, you see the diet. In the diet, there are hundreds and thousands of micronutrients which the cell needs to use the genes. And today we are eating a food which has a high amount of calories, but is almost void of micronutrients. That means our body is in lack of tools he needs to work. And if he has a lack of these tools, he gets weak in his organ function and we become sick. So it's the mismatch between the resources of our environment, which we need, and the work of our body that we getting sick, that we get chronic disease, non-communicated diseases. Go ahead.
Professor Spitz, can I interrupt you for one moment here and go back to the other mode because of our time?
Yeah.
It's a perfect moment to make a point. If we can go back to the other screen form. Okay, thank you so much for this insights, because I think, and we will come back to this, but what I wanted the panelists and also our audience to recognize here is that basically the question what we eat is basically dominating all the design of our cities, because it's also dominating the design of our, when you go with the airplane over our countries, you see the design, the cultivation of the land. So basically the decision, for example, to eat meat leads automatically to much more surface that needs to be covered with soya, leads also to completely different urban designs, leads to a whole supply chain that is basically not only destroying the planet, but also destroying ourselves, like Professor Spitz showed. And COVID-19 is a very good example indeed, that it's basically affecting, first and foremost the people that have preconditions. Yeah, so basically the weak body that is a product of our culture. Yeah, this is Jane Witter's way how I wanted to build the bridge in new direction, because culture is something Professor Spitz mentioned it, and Annie Hood mentioned it too, and so Herb mentioned it, that culture is something that we are constantly producing, that is created basically to keep us alive. But it can also work in exactly the other direction. And we are now in a situation to recognize that our culture probably led us into a direction that that we will not be able to sustain as an organism. And Jane, you worked a lot with the topics of nature, with the topics of water also, especially, which is an extremely important part of both of our culture and of our nature and of the nature of everything. And I would like your take on what Professor Spitzel just showed in the context of the human city. How we can create a culture that will uplift our organism. And do you think this is something, this is a debate that we can basically push?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the intersection of nature, culture is absolutely critical to how we look at our cities and sort of bringing it together in a holistic view. And that's what I thought was interesting about the Human Cities paper in particular. And within that, I was actually going to share some projects that we've done recently, if I could have my presentation, please, or thoughts about water in cities, because we've been talking about nature, a lot about trees and so on, and it's been fascinating. But I think that also water is a dimension that can be brought in, and we talk a lot about blue space in cities, but much less about green space. Yet we often cited our cities to be next to water for many different reasons, for transport, hydration, agriculture, defense, but also well-being, spirituality, ritual, and so on. But in the sort of last 100 years or so, I don't know if any of you read a wonderful book called Water and Forgetfulness by Ivan Illich. It's just a sort of short essay, but he talks about how we've exiled water from our lives and turned it into this industrial fluid that we sort of ignore. And I wanted to, in the last year, we're doing a program in New York, actually, called Water Futures, bringing together designers and architects and scientists and other specialists on water to work together to look at how we can reintegrate water culture. And this was an exhibition we did a few years ago called Urban Plunge, and it shows a project which I think began in the 90s, but is actually being realized now. I think the funding and the planning has been secured in the center of Berlin, and it's about bringing water, swimming back, and it's a disused shipping canal. It's, I think, nearly 2 kilometers long, and the swimming stretch will be 1 kilometer, and the rest are reed bed filtering the water, so you get naturally purified river water. But I think it's part of a movement to look at a different kind of human well-being culture in cities that's so fascinating. Imagine, if you put your body in a city, you want to know water, you want to know what it's like, its pollution. It's a great barometer of nature's health in general. Why should cities be polluted, river cities be polluted sewers? Why can't they be clean again? So I think this movement is an absolutely fascinating way of looking at cities. And sorry, the next slide, I'll show you a couple more examples. Could we move to the next image? Great. I think the sort of movement of wild swimming began, or urban swimming began 15 years or so ago when Copenhagen cleaned its industrial port for leisure. And I think, as you were saying, Annie, and you mentioned recent studies of nature and cities and well-being, and I think it's fascinating. The NHS have just done a Blue Gyms study. I think it's called Blue Gym in the UK, and it was being discussed on the radio the other day that doctors might be prescribing cold water swimming, and it was sort of discussed as though there was some real surprise at this. But of course, there's 19th century like well-being theories, there's a long history of this. So I think sometimes we need to go back to kind of vernacular understandings and so forth. The next one, please. This is another Copenhagen Carlsberg baths, where it's all about expanding the waterfront, so you get making the river accessible for people, rather than just being either sewers or motorways for boats. And the next one, please. This is something that hasn't happened yet in London, but is a wonderful proposal for swimming by Blackfriars, a series of baths in the Thames. But it also shows how water can sort of reintroduce biodiversity into the city through these sort of small touches that can have, I think, larger impact. And the next one. Oh yeah, this is a very different water project by the Dutch architects Oes for Chennai. And I think this is fascinating because it's a very different approach to water culture. Chennai, probably some of you know, last year faced its own version of Cape Town's Day Zero when the city was going to run out of water, quite literally. And I think the rains came in July, halfway through the year, and it was just about saved. But it's given them a very different approach to the water infrastructure for the city. And this is a project, City of 1,000 Tanks, is being trialled. And basically it goes back from the sort of centralized infrastructure to look at the temple tanks in the city. Could we go on to the next slide, please? And India, I don't know if you know about historic step wells and temple tanks to collect water and make rain welcome in the city and sort of celebrate it. And the slide we saw before was showing how these temple tanks can be brought together in a green network that will both clean and collect water rather than sort of being unwelcome as it is at the moment. And the final slide. And so these are the bioswales. This is the current situation on the left and what they could be on the right through the housing and connecting different neighborhoods through water infrastructures. I mean, I think this is, the reason I want to show this project is it's got a very, for well-being in the city, this nature-based approach and making infrastructures visible again, because we've made water invisible and environments that are hostile to it. So that's sort of where I'm coming from for the well-being aspect.
Thank you very much, Jane. I think we all agree that water is something that reconnects us to nature because it is a very strong force of nature and it's in all living beings. It has also something that it shares with all living beings, but it's also a very precious good now. We have to learn that water is something that is a social, it has a social dimension. And Danny, I wanted to have you maybe introduce the social dimension of cities. We heard now about the healthcare impact. We heard a lot about the cultural impact. This all Ben mentioned actually the social dimension of cities and city planning. What is in your opinion and in your personal work also and experience, also listening to this panel, the social dimension that should be highlighted?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for hosting this discussion. It feels really timely. And I don't think, I grew up in a rural part of Sri Lanka and in Papua New Guinea and only moved to a city when I was a teenager and have since lived only in cities in New York, in London, in Johannesburg, in Sydney. But not until the last 6 months have I ever really felt the reality of living in a city because of having been to, stuck at home, working from home or living at work, depending on how you see it. And I've become, I suppose, really conscious, and I suspect all of us have. I think, Annie, you put it really well about the sort of, feeling trapped in our spaces in cities. And so COVID, I think, is a wake-up call in so many ways. For me, and particularly in the work that we do at Oxfam, I think it's brought to life the sort of deep inequalities that we see across the world. And in a city like London, where I sit, I'm really conscious of just the physical inequality of access to space that people have, and I see it in my own work. And we have several thousand employees in Oxfam. Many of us have the luxury of a room that we can sit in and sort of isolate ourselves from our families, but many don't, and don't have the privilege of being able to live and survive, thrive, if you will, viably in a city environment or in wherever they have. but also I think to Ben's point and many other people's point that, you know, this is a pandemic that has thrown into sharp relief the real inequalities between the people we may live next door to, who we have limited interactions with, but, you know, whose life and life chances have been transformed as a result of the disruption of this pandemic. And I see it really clearly in the work that we do with urban poor in developing countries. You know, I read in your green paper this startling statistic that, you know, only 4% of all of the billions of humans that have ever lived have lived in a city. But our projections suggest that by 2030, 1 in 4 humans who will live on the planet will live in an urban slum.
Yeah.
And so, you know, although living in a city is relatively new to humankind, it's not only going to be prolific, but it's going to be prolific for the poorest of the world. And it already is. And if you think of COVID-19, and I suppose this is a point similar to the point Professor Spitz was making, you know, if you happen to be living in an urban slum today and you're facing COVID restrictions and lockdowns, your life chances are almost, you know, are unimaginably worse than they were before COVID and compared to your rural compatriots. You know, this was brought home to me very clearly from a text message, an SMS that a colleague received from a taxi driver in Nairobi at the early days of the pandemic. And this is a taxi driver he normally uses when he visits Nairobi. And the taxi driver simply said, "This virus will starve us before it infects us." And this is the reality. You know, we think that more people will die as a result this year of starvation caused by the disruption to supply chains and to our food systems than will actually die of the infection itself. Yeah. And that, you know, in particular, if you think of urban environments, I mean, in Uganda, 80% of the workforce is informal. They don't have access to tax systems and fiscal remedies that most of us have some sort of access to. They also don't have the access necessarily to a sustainable food supply chain. And so I think we have, you know, we live in a time, in a moment of human history where we really have to grapple with both the well-being of those of us who live in cities like London or Berlin or you know, other amazing places, but also grapple with the reality that we live in a time of huge inequity, and that the life chances of our fellow human beings who happen to be in urban areas in other parts of the world were already pretty bad, but this pandemic has made life you know, even more difficult. And then I suppose if you overlay on that where Stefano started us with and look at the sort of intergenerational aspects of that inequality, the fact that we are eating our future, literally, then it's a sort of triple conundrum of well-being. How do we make sure that each of us can thrive in relatively affluent urban areas? What are our responsibilities to others who are less well off? And then, of course, what are our responsibilities to future generations of human beings? So this is a really fantastic and timely conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. This are really you know, I think this perspective that you open up is a very it's actually maybe the most important perspective, because as we said before, that COVID-19 showed us that we are so much connected with everybody else that basically you cannot be well off if somebody next to you is not well off. I mean, it's just an illusion probably over, you know, a short amount of time. But already your children will be affected if we cannot solve the problem of poverty by 100%. And Stefano, you started this with the presentation, and there was one thing that especially came in the presentation and into my mind, that is also part of our green paper, that you want to create within cities autonomous, almost self-sustained places where people can live their life. They have space to live their life, but they have also space to create micro supply chains. And urban farming is here a very big topic, so that greenery is not only a a decoration or a park, but it's also our food supply. We can't forget that actually, if you move to the countryside, the earth is delivering to us almost everything what we need to survive. You mentioned Papua New Guinea, that I was happy to visit some time before COVID-19 actually, and it's incredible when you are in these places that are so full of nature, and where nature is basically giving you everything, you know. So and also I think, Stefano, if we would switch to the plant-based food supply chain, there wouldn't be any problem to have everybody fed. And our productivity with the technology we have developed is also so high that there's no problem anymore of producing and of distribution. But the problem I think that we have is a design problem. How we design this, that is still based on a free market economy, but that is producing what we need and not mostly what we don't need. Because I think this is another lesson that we took from COVID, is that there's so many things we don't really need. Yeah. But there's so many things that so many people really need to survive, basically. And this is also a big inequality, that the system is producing so many things, so many spaces, so many goods, so many transactions that are absolutely not necessary, while it's not producing at the same time things that are absolutely necessary to survive, also for us. Yeah. Also, Ben, if you like to jump in, Stefano, that. But you both have to demute, because it's...
It's going to be very interesting to what extent COVID does, what effect it has on sort of dominant models of urbanization. Because we have sort of seen the re-urbanization of our economies in the last sort of 20 or 30 years as we move to an industrial to a service economy in a way that no one. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the digital revolution started, and the best bet, people were predicting it would all end up working in sort of huts in the forest or huts in the hills, because we could all communicate remotely. And quite the opposite happened. Places like New York and London, San Francisco, Paris and elsewhere sort of boomed, often leaving their nations and their sort of poorer regions behind. Richard Florida talked about, not the world is flat, but the world is spiky. And the spikes were these sort of, large global cities, which attracted all the investment, all the talent, so much of the sort of creativity and culture. And it might be the case that actually COVID does change that dynamic a bit, and people use cities and relate to cities in a slightly different way. And we do spend more time working at home or working in local neighborhoods. And what will that mean for cities? There's a sort of rosy future, actually, where they become much richer things, because when you go into them, you're going into them not for a routine reason, but to do something special. But there's also a sort of, I guess, a slightly more dystopian version of it, which is, they just lose their buzz, they lose their edge, and they lose their vitality and the creativity that we associate with cities. And I think it's an open question of which one of those we're heading for.
Yeah, I mean, you have the situation now in the United States coming all together, like with the social unrest, that it is not only a racial issue, but I think that is very much also a social issue, because it's basically underprivileged communities that were left behind. And this is, I think, exactly the point that Danny was making, that we have these communities not only in other countries, but we have them also in our countries, where, like London, cities like London, cities like Berlin, we will have to deal with big migration flows also. So it's in our own interest, and anyways, in our own interest to create solutions. And very much, because I think we can create these solutions only when we accept that culture was something that co-created this problem, created a lot of solutions, but culture became something that is basically a non-essential. All the cultural workers, the creative workers, are non-essential workers in times of COVID. But we forget that the last time we reacted as humanity to changed social dynamics after the Manchester capitalism was introducing industrialization, it was Bauhaus. that helped us to recreate our cities. Yeah, it was a movement that was actually a cultural movement, not political, not entrepreneurial. It was a movement that was redesigning from a very holistic perspective, from the spoon of tea up to housing and urban planning. And this kind of movement is now lacking. With the knowledge and technology we have, and also speaking about technology, I think that companies like Google, for example, that did amazingly well to improve our lives. For example, the ability to get information, to get access, also to spread information and access to people that otherwise never would have the chance to visit a library, for example. Basically, the infrastructure is there to uplift with information, what Professor Spitz mentioned, to give the people the right tools, to have the right knowledge, to prepare themselves, to give them the blueprints, to send them via internet, without having to send papers, to have to send books, so the ability for us to spread knowledge that helps to create cities and communities that are more, sustainable and more just, I think is something where I personally have the feeling, but please, if you could elaborate on this, we have not enough cooperation between the real estate, the real economy that is basically not yet digital, or that is about creating our physical space, and the digital economy that could help people really to recreate their communities with the means of technology.
Yeah, so I think it's a really exciting and positive moment for more collaboration and more partnerships. I think there's an onus and an impetus on all technology companies now to say, we have this data, it is accessible, how do we get it to the right people? Is it through partnerships with cultural institutions, with educational institutions? We have just announced a collaboration with the World Wildlife Fund on a new environmental platform to think about the environmental impact of textiles and raw materials. Nothing can be done in a vacuum. And I think that, yes, there's, I mentioned the Google Arts and Culture Project. There's 7 million artworks online. How do you get those stories? How do you get that information into the hands of the people who would benefit most from it? It doesn't just happen by serendipity. Of course, the amazing thing about the internet is that there is a lot of serendipity, but now the next step is, pushing towards providing this information to the right people. And the second thing I think is thinking about the idea of community. We've talked about this a lot in this conversation. I mean, the words we've been using for the last 6 months are not world-changing, it's about cultures, communities, clusters. We use the word cluster all the time. And so how can we think about how to bring technology back to communities to benefit them, to allow them to connect in a way that feels like you're actually bringing people together in a way that comes back to what you said, the real. You can't invent just entire planets of communities online. You have to think about what already exists and how we can help to support them. So I think the tools are there, even with cities. There are probably the tools to think about which cities work, which cities are more diverse, which cities are more inclusive, which cities are coping well with COVID in terms of resources and dealing with inequality and crossing the divides. And how do we use tools like artificial intelligence to bring that information to city leaders, community leaders? We obviously can't rebuild everything today, but equally, I think for all of us, it would be very sad to see cities die out. To your point, culture comes, in so many ways from cities and over time and over centuries and millennia. So I think that's another way that technology can be used in a positive way, is to look at cities and to think about not just culture, but really the logistics of it, and to provide solutions in a way that's thoughtful, maybe a bit slower, maybe that requires a bit more time and energy, and is not just about, pressing a button and allowing something into the world. And I think this is a great moment to create that incentive for all these organizations to lean into that also.
Yeah, totally. What you said with what I find totally interesting, and what actually also, because the knowledge aspect, to spread knowledge in communities, Professor Spitz mentioned to live in wooden houses is a much better experience than to live in concrete. Concrete is also creating 30% of the CO2 emissions, or not concrete, but building materials in general. Annie, you mentioned this experience in being in nature and like completely, you know, diving into the nature and basically hugging the tree and then feeling this energy. I find this very interesting because this is an experience, and then you mentioned the slum. The slum is actually something very interesting, basically, because it's not in the nature, but it's also not really in the city. It's something in between. It's basically something that has not the resources of the city. This is why it's very, very bad, but actually it's very bad because the people are not in the nature. The nature, the experience of nature, if you can access it, if you can live in it, you know, is actually, well, paradoxically, for free. You know, so basically you could be in nature for free, but still this is most probably the most inaccessible experience for most of the poor people, because they are actually living in slums that have no access to nature. What is a paradox itself, because probably with a different form of design, we could recreate much cheaper, you know, living environment with animals, as Stefano is proposing, maybe more countryside-like, that would cost less resources. I mean, microfinancing showed us how effective it can be if free market, you know, standards are applied that are really applied. So there's really money dedicated to it. So we really invest money into this kind of designs, and we give these people, this is something that Jaden said in our last talk, that it's extremely important that people have ownership, that people have something that belongs to them, and that they can really take care for this, that a city is not a product of real estate developers actually that are creating your reality, but that this reality is created by yourself. Maybe Danny, what is your take on you know, the individual responsibility and the possibility to give the people this responsibility, to give them also the resources? What do you think would be necessary to make out of this slum citizens owners of a property that they could take care for?
Yeah, look, I think there is huge potential, and we should recognize that, you know, pre-COVID, the last few decades have been a period of huge progress for humanity. I mean, more people have come out of extreme poverty in the last 2 decades than most economists and other analysts would have predicted. The job wasn't complete, and sadly, COVID disruption may well push more people back into poverty. In fact, Oxfam analysis suggests 500 million more people will be pushed into extreme poverty as a result of the long-term impacts of this pandemic. But I remain optimistic. I think that, you know, the pre-COVID experience suggests that human progress is possible, and especially if it's linked, as you say, to, you know, capital assets of whatever form that people can then build their own resilience and their own family's resilience with. And I think that's the sort of long-term ideal that we need to think about, and of course couple that with sustainability, so that again they have opportunity, but collectively we are living up to our responsibilities towards a more sustainable future. And, you know, I think that's, whether it's land reform, whether it's being creative about cash transfer programs, whether it's being, you know, promoting true gender equality to correct the gender pay gap, you know, wherever I look, there are these injustices that have stopped people from living their full potential. But just as you can recognize those injustices, you can also recognize the solutions that will remove those obstacles. And I think that is the moment. You know, I increasingly I'm thinking about, you know, how do we make this a just recovery from this pandemic? What, you know, transform everything that we do, whether that's, you know, the way we think about well-being in our own lives, or the way we think about global inequality. If we don't use this opportunity to build towards that just recovery, I think historians will look at our generations of humans and think, you know, we really did an injustice to the future. And so I think that's our responsibility, especially those of us who are in positions of leadership or thought leadership, of influence, to push for a truly just recovery.
Well, Sorry?
Nice to hear, but I'm skeptic. Very,
Very good. That's
unfortunately. Yeah, your ideas are correct, very correct, but huge problem. Let us see what happens until the end of this year.
I mean, if I may, I think we're starting
Yes.
to see a bit of evidence already. I'd like to think certainly that Mother Nature would be a long-term beneficiary from this pandemic, but I think we're already seeing a shift in investment focus towards the planet and indeed humanity, and just a sort of a small but I think relevant grassroots example. I'm involved in a bid for one of the UK cities. It's a very large bid, but the social value of everything within it, it's construction, but it has various health and well-being elements to it. And the focus, I've never seen such a focus on the social value balance and putting tangible numbers to that. How nature is intended to be wound into this construction, how social equity is being, pursued in a much more, dare I say, responsive way rather than half-hearted strategy, if I can put it that way. So, Danny, I really do think that some changes are happening. I think, unfortunately, we're all in the midst of, political and geopolitical issues. But, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I am seeing some shifts firsthand that give me encouragement and give me cause, for optimism.
So I can maybe connect to this with the example of the German Schrebergarten or the dacha in Russia. So coming from Poland, where until '89 we were living in an unfree society, also without resources. Everybody basically had this little piece of land with the little wooden house, actually, Professor Spitz, with his own garden, because this was the only place where you could actually get fresh vegetables, because you couldn't buy them, because the socialistic economy wasn't able to produce enough and distribute it also. So everybody basically spent a lot of time. This was the same for the GDR, this was the same for Czechoslovakia, the same in Poland, the same in Russia. Everybody needed to have this little, very simple house with a very simple garden where a lot of garden work was done. And I remember when my parents first time moved to Germany, and they had this vegetables from the supermarket, where you have thousands of different sorts, and also I think it was a pork schnitzel, and suddenly the pork schnitzel in the pan was full of water, and they wouldn't understand why the meat. I mean, we had almost no meat, and we had also no vegetables in the shops, but the vegetables we had grown, and the meat we got once a month from the hunter was extremely high quality, where everything we could buy in Germany, in West Germany, was absolutely low quality, because the meat, there was water added to it, and the vegetables were imported from Holland, where they are, as you know, mass produced. And this kind of having his own supply chain, having his own space that you can basically take care for, and where you are, when children, this is maybe a cultural aspect to this, when children are drawing a house, they are always drawing an individual house with an individual facade, with an individual garden, where the house becomes a part of their own body, a part of their own expression. This is not something everybody knows, that bought an apartment or rented an apartment and then had to do the interior design. So we know that this is something that everybody wants to create for himself, his own space, his own environment. And there, is one of the biggest businesses in the world, the real estate sector that we are working in. But this is actually creating these environments for the people, and maybe sometimes less is more, and is even more healthy. I don't know if this, Professor Spitz, would be something that you would agree to, coming from Germany,
It
knowing the Schrebergarten.
It would be extremely good to have it. My family would have starved after the Second World War if we had not a garden, a small garden, and was intensively working on that. And again, all these resources got lost in the big cities because there's no room to have a garden. And if you have to drive 30 kilometers outside for a piece of place where you can work, it doesn't. So it's a huge task we have to do to reintroduce the necessary resources to live healthy in a city. It will be a huge task to do that. But on the other hand, as we heard, the more and more people are going to the cities, to the metropoles. We have to do that because otherwise it will decompensate completely.
Yeah, no, I believe, can I add something? So that in Europe, for instance, we don't have only big cities and, let's say, single family houses. We simply don't have the sphere of the urban environment and the sphere of the countryside. We have a constellation of historical rural villages. And I believe that this is and will become for us an amazing resource to rethink a different way to, let's say, delocalize the urban life in a different environmental context. So I believe this is an amazing opportunity. We have to do our best to avoid dispersion, sprawl, and we have to do our best to imagine that, we have to regenerate our cities, but at the same time, we could start to think how to rehabilitate this constellation of small historical villages that are, for instance, in France or in Germany or in Italy. Part of them are more or less completely abandoned. So I believe the city is something which is connected with the concept of intensity. City is made by the density of spaces and by the variety of cultures. So the idea, this topic idea of imagining that we are going back to the 80s, where we had this, let's say, tragic phenomenon of dispersion, sprawl in the States and in Europe, it's for me really, such a bad scenario. We do our best to imagine to a kind of reciprocity between cities, big cities, and this constellation of small centers that were cities. In the history of Europe, they were places where the urban life were developed. So I believe that's another very important what we have to start to consider with attention.
Stefano, thank you very much. Danny already had to leave because he is on another panel that starts, I think, now. So I want to thank you all, but I cannot let you go without a last question that I would like everybody of you to answer. We are collecting sentences for our Wellbeing City Manifesto that will be based on the Human City project, and I would like everybody of you just to say the sentence that for you would be the most important one to integrate in such a manifesto, if you could, reduce it to one sentence. Stefano, as you were just talking, could you give me this one sentence from your side?
Well, I was saying that I think last time was imagine that humans should go toward forests and trees toward cities. Well, today I believe that what if we imagine is that probably we have to reimagine cities as archipelagos of villages, and we have to imagine villages as small cities. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you very much. Annie, can you give us a sentence for the manifesto from your side?
Surely. For me, it would be the future of well-being will be simultaneously driven by nature and technology, but defined by humanity.
Thank you so much. This is very beautiful.
Thank you.
So, Herr, from your side, please.
I would say that for cities to survive and continue to thrive and grow, we need to focus on community and bringing people together.
Perfect. Thank you so much also for your participation. Ben, what would be your take? But you have to demute.
building on what Suhair said, I think, start with the public spaces, the places where people connect socially, and build your city around those, whether big or small.
Super, thank you very much, Ben. Professor Spitz, what would be your...
I think the big challenge will be to rehumanize the city. The city has to become species specific. The city has to offer all the resources we need, because otherwise it will be COVID-19 or the sugar in the food or whatsoever, which is going to kill us. We have to rebuild an environment which is species specific, human specific environment, and then it will be no problem to live in their happy and healthy long life.
Thank you very much. Jane, what is your sentence?
Well, it's touching on a lot of what we said, but it's going back to put a sort of equitable access to nature at the heart of the neighbourhood and the community and the future city, but also focusing this on regenerative systems. So it's often going away or reimagining many of the systems we have at the moment.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank you all very much. My wish would be that we stay connected, and you know that we will, and that we are really not only talking but building the next the city of the future. I think this is the right moment to do it. It's, as Danny said, timely, and now we can also, maybe one of the arguments we all have now towards the other side that wants to stick with the usual, what already, what was always done a certain way, is that it didn't work out. When we have to close down our societies, when we have to shut down our economy, it means we really have to change, because there's no gain in going forward in the same way. I want to thank all the many people that tuned in on the different channels, and I also want to announce our next Wellbeing Culture Forum that will happen in Berlin. It will be partly virtual, but partly we will transform it already into the real space of the gallery of Johann König, parallel to the gallery weekend from the 11th to the 13th of September in this magnificent Bauhaus brutalist church that is host of the König Gallery. We will have on 3 consecutive days, 11th, 12th and 13th of September, talks titled From Breaking Bauhaus to Growing Gaia, connecting to the ideology and idea of James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis that were introducing the symbiotic planet and the Gaia hypothesis that sees our planet as one living organism and all of us as a part of it. From this perspective, we want to see how we can propose new solutions for cities, and I would be very happy to see you all again. And I want to express again a very, very big thank to you for participating in this session. Thank you very much. And the green paper Human Cities is available for download on our website, thermegroup.com or Therme Art. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.